Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Akshaya Kumar. I'm the Director of Crisis Advocacy at Human Rights Watch, and it's my honor to welcome you today to this side event on ending the Rohingya crisis. We thank the governments of Malta, Denmark, Canada, and Finland for co-sponsoring this important convening and for creating space for a discussion on community-centered actions for protection, justice, and lasting peace. To be held on the sidelines of tomorrow's landmark high-level conference on the situation of Rohingya Muslims and other minorities in Myanmar. I will be moderating the first portion of the event featuring our distinguished government speakers and a video from the camps. I respectfully request the government speakers to please limit your remarks to 2 minutes each. Following that, I will hand over to Wai Wai Nu, who will be moderating the second portion of the panel. Tomorrow's conference offers an important opportunity for member states to condemn the ongoing threats to Rohingya in Myanmar and underscore that conditions for safe return do not currently exist, particularly amid escalating conflict and abuses. Rohingya refugees, whom Human Rights Watch has interviewed, want to return to their homes and lands, but only when they will be safe, free, and able to obtain Myanmar citizenship, which they've been long denied. We hope today's discussions jumpstart concrete initiatives to condemn the Myanmar military and Arakan army's abuses against the Rohingya, support efforts for cross-border humanitarian aid, and pressure the Arakan army to improve conditions and allow freedom of movement in areas under its control. This event is being live streamed and is available on Web TV. Your Excellencies, it's my honor now to turn to our government panel. We have speakers from the distinguished mission of Finland, and the distinguished mission of Malta, as well as the head of the United Nations IIMM. And I will begin by acknowledging the distinguished ambassador of Malta, Ambassador Natasha Meli. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure for me to join you, ladies and gentlemen, and excellencies, in this timely discussion on ending the Rohingya crisis, focusing on community-centered actions for a path toward lasting peace in Rakhine State and across Myanmar. The plight of the Rohingya people remains one of the most urgent humanitarian and human rights crises of our time. More than 1 million Rohingya remain in Bangladesh, living in extremely precarious conditions, while hundreds of thousands still in Myanmar face persecution, forced displacement, and violence. The situation in Rakhine State continues to worsen as clashes between the military and armed groups have exposed civilians to renewed atrocities, including killings, arbitrary detention, sexual violence, and starvation, caused by restrictions on humanitarian access. My country, Malta, firmly believes that humanitarian support must go hand in hand with addressing the root causes of this crisis. The Rohingya will only be able to return home in safety and dignity if Myanmar ensures equal rights, citizenship, and security. Until such conditions are created, premature repatriation is not an option. Accountability remains essential. Malta strongly supports the work of the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar, as well as international legal processes at the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. Justice for past atrocities is critical to prevent their recurrence. But while accountability and humanitarian relief are necessary, they are not sufficient. Today's discussion will focus on community-centered actions, and rightly so. The voices of the Rohingya themselves, together with local civil society, women peace builders, and youth, must be at the center of any sustainable solution. Women and girls who bear a disproportionate burden of violence, displacement, and exploitation must be empowered as agents of peace and resilience. Malta will continue to stand with the Rohingya people and to advocate for solutions that are community-driven, rights-based, and sustainable. We believe that the path to lasting peace in Rakhine and across Myanmar must include accountability, humanitarian relief, and above all, the meaningful participation of those most affected. Let's use today's discussion to amplify the voice of the Rohingya, reaffirm our collective responsibility, and chart concrete steps towards a future where they can live in safety, dignity, and equality. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta, and I would now acknowledge His Excellency Anders Adlercreutz, his ambassador of the Permanent Mission of Finland.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, dear friends. It's an honor to open this discussion on the regional and international response to the Rohingya crisis. The situation is alarming after the resumed fighting in Rakhine and in other parts of Myanmar. Besides the conference, there will be several side events to discuss the rights and protection of Rohingyas and other minorities. I would like to thank the organizers of this event for the possibility to discuss possible novel solutions. I agree with your approach that these solutions require lasting peace among all key stakeholders in Myanmar. It's good for this reason that we can discuss the rights and protection of Rohingyas and other minorities in this conference together. Solving the Rohingya crisis could in fact have the benefit of striving for a solution to wider Myanmar conflict. This could increase the attention towards the Rohingya crisis. These two issues are indeed interlinked. The voluntary, safe, dignified, and sustainable return of Rohingya Muslims and other refugees requires a conducive environment. We condemn the escalating violence and human rights violations and abuses by the military and other armed actors. The access to humanitarian aid must be unrestricted. These all calls for wider political solutions. Bangladesh is also bearing a heavy burden when hosting the refugees. Both Rohingyas and Bangladesh deserve our strong support in securing the human rights. Self-resilience, jobs, and education both in Rakhine State and in refugee camps. So, dear organizers, I commend you for underlining the community-centered actions. We should, of course, all be masters of our own lives. This certainly also is the case with the Rohingyas. There must be freedom to build an enabling environment with agriculture and other jobs and with proper schools without discrimination. I wish everybody strength and success with your collective efforts in moving towards a comprehensive political process for conflict resolution. I want to thank especially the civil society actors and representatives from Myanmar for your strength and courage and your tireless efforts for a peaceful and just future for Myanmar. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Finland, and I would now like to acknowledge Mr. Nicholas Koumjian of the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be part of this important discussion on ensuring the safe return and justice for the Rohingya. My organization, the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, is conducting criminal investigations of serious international crimes committed throughout Myanmar. But we're looking also particularly at the events of 2017 and what happened to the Rohingya, the violence that preceded that, and also at crimes that are currently taking place in Rakhine State. I've gone many times to the camps, and Rohingya consistently ask me, what can you do to help me return home? When can I return home? But when Rohingya can return home, one of the problems is there are no homes left to go back to because in many, many cases, their villages were destroyed. Today, my mechanism released a report on the destruction of Rohingya land and highlighting the fact that many times villages have been bulldozed and in their place, border guard police stations have been built. For Rohingya refugees to be able to return to Myanmar in a way that is dignified, safe, and sustainable, the violence has to end, the violence against civilians in Rakhine State, and perpetrators must be held to account. Rohingya will also need assistance. They need the return of lands or some restitution, some compensation in order to rebuild their homes and their lives and the communities that were destroyed. I hope the discussions today and tomorrow will be a step forward for the Rohingya return and that we will ensure the importance of justice and accountability for the crimes against them. We stand ready at the mechanism to help in national and international jurisdictions who may be willing and able to bring perpetrators to justice and to help to create conditions for the safe, dignified return of the Rohingya. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. At this point, we would like to show a video. This is a video which features the testimonies of Rohingya themselves under the principle nothing about us without us. We feel it's important for their voices to be heard directly in these spaces. The video was directed by Sahat Zia Hero, a Rohingya photographer, and features those who are newly arrived to the camps in Cox's Bazar. So without further ado, the video on the screen ahead.
আরা জানার হেফাজত তো একটা আগে বাবা এবার জুলুম করে আর বাবা হাতে বাঙাইছে মা দেয়া করি এবারে দাম কি বলে আনা নাগে আরা দেশি আরা রতন দেশ আরা বিমির দেশ আল্লাহ বলে আরো তো বেশি বেশি পেট পুরে আমার দেশের মাঝে আরো যাইতে চাইতে আজ আমার মিলিটারি করতে লগিয়ে তাই যে বাদে মারি ফেলাই এত বেসাই আরা করে দিয়ে যা করিব 2017 মানে আরা তুলা তুলি মাদে বেড়াই নন্দনে বেশি মারা দাঁড়া কইছে হাইতে মাঝে ফুরা দি ফেলাই ফুয়াই সুন্দর ফুরা দি ফেলাই আতো বাপু সাইজন তো মাদে হাড়ি রে গাত মাদে হাড়ি ফেলাই হাড়ি বেলে বাধা ওনারা 5 জন গরম উত্তর গলাই রে তোর মাঝে জুলুম হয়েছে বেশি বেড়াইন্দের বেশি জুলুম দিদি তো যা দিদি মাঝে মানে বিছাই মগে সাপ গরি মারি ফেলাইয়ে এনলা গুড়া গুড়া বছর যা মাসুম বাসে অকল বাম্মা মরি গিয়ে চিন্তা থাকি ইন মগ ললে এনে হরে মা ফালা দিয়ে আয় আম্বুরি এনে গো গাঁতো ভিতরে গলি গেলাম বই এতাল্লা মগ ন দেখে আল্লাহ বাসাই আরে গুলি সারি ফের হাই বাদে আধা ঘন্টা পর্যন্ত আসছিলাম মরার টালত
ana bara ma shanti ga di fara mbasa wala udashi dia tundori are ar sariga mala ba mutar gola bala ki magbage dishi gungo jana আটাগারি স্কুল মতো তাই কি এর মতো একদম চাল মাসে দিনে দি দন লানাগিরি মে জারারে মগি নেলে যাইবিল্লা ওরিয়া তো মতো সিরঙ্গ মাদে এরা মতো একসাথে শনিবার অর হইছে আটাগারি স্কুল মধ্যে শনিবারে সিরঙ্গ মাদে ডুরুম ফলাই 5 জন মজিয়ে দিন আজ জামাইতে আজিতে আর এগানাউসি আমি ফাজ যাই আছে
দাসে বিগিন দাসে মগবাগে দাসে মসজিদ দিয়া দাসে বিলত পারত হইয়াত দাসে খাইবার পর পানি হাতে পরত মানে মানুষের হাসকার করতে হরম মাঝে মানে ইংলা হনো জায়গা নাই দে মরা ছাড়া জায়গা খালি জায়গা নাই দিলা মোরা অচর করলাম বই মোরা তো মগবাগে হেঙ্গুরি মানুষই মারা জানি সাথে কি মগবাগি ভাড়াতে নেলি টারাম মিলিটারি টারাম গুলো দিয়ে খবর শুনে না দাসে দিমাস করে আইনে মাথা ছাগল লাসি দেড়ে এই যাই থাকে মজা আন্টি ঠালকল বেশি ঠালমারি তারা পুরা দেওয়ালা দিলাম মানুষের আছে মরা কল ঠালমারি পুরা দিলাম সব তকল দেখা নিউজ দেখি জায়গার মাঝে হনো মেড়ে নোয়াছিল আর দাসে হনো লিফুট নাই তো আল্লাহ হন দুনিয়া এই দাসে নজানা দিয়ে আল্লাহ বলি কেঙ্গুর হয়ে পারবে হয় না এই দাসে দুনিয়ারে দেখা আল্লাহ বলি আর খেলা মারি ফেলাইলে তো মানুষ ইলা জাজুলুম করছে না কম মাঝে দাসে দুনিয়া জানি পারল না দাসে বিডিপি কেন দে সব বিগিং করছি কোন আসেনি হিবে কোন আর ভাজ যাই বেগুন আর এখানে গুছি কোন আর বেড়া রাত দিয়া আর বেড়া দেখো তুই আইন দিলা আসিলে বেড়া রাহা তো আরো রাহা তো বেশি মানি মজিয়া আর বেড়া নিয়ে তো হাসকে রায় দেখে যায় এটা বেশি মানি মজে রে ইয়া মাঝে তালা মাঝে যাইয়ে নাই মানুষের তলে লুকা থাকি এঙ্গের থেকে গুলি হয় বাদে রক্ত জারগে বক রক্ত জারগে ইয়া তো গুলির গুতা মারি চাইয়ে মগ বাগি আয় মজি না আইন নলরি মাতার আই গুলি হাই তো উষা সা তো আইন নলরি উড়ানোর মাঝে গো গাঁত আছে আয় আম্বুরি অনেক গাঁত বুতরে গলি গই হাল সদিন সারা চাষিলাম আয় গাতিবা বুতরি
my thanks to the Women's Peace Network for producing that powerful compilation of testimonies directly from the camps. I'll now acknowledge the founder and executive director of Women's Peace Network, Wai Wai Nu, who will moderate the second portion of this conversation.
What a powerful video, and it's heartbreaking. And it was actually, as this event is primarily led by the Rohingya community themselves with the support of incredible our missions and states here as well as NGO partners. This video was also created by the local photographer from the camp, who is happened to be a UN award winning photographer, UN Nation Award winner. So we are very glad that this video can be shown here. And thank you, Akshaya, a longtime friend of us, for your support. This is Wai Wai Nu, the founder and executive director of Women's Peace Network, and I'm honored to moderate this discussion today. Together, we will address the core of our event's theme, finding community-centered actions for protection, justice, and lasting peace. I am joined by 5 distinguished leaders and experts. We have Tongkin from BRO UK and Arkan Rohingya National Council. And we have Lucky Karim from Refugee Women for Peace and Justice. We have Noor Aziza from Rohingya Mayaphoinor Collaborative Network. And we have Caroline Nash from the Asia Advocacy, from Amnesty International, the Asia Advocacy Director. And we have James, the head of the OHCHR Myanmar team. And we are so glad to have this distinguished speaker with us today. So maybe we will start with James first. So James, in the latest OHCHR report on Myanmar, it says that the situations of Rohingya in northern Rakhine State was reminiscent of 2017 atrocities. So basically mirroring 2017 atrocities. Could you tell us more about the report, your finding? Yes, how? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for being here, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah, my team has been monitoring and publicly reporting on the situation in Myanmar ever since the crisis began, and really 2024 was the absolute worst year thus far since the crisis began for civilians, and that includes in Rakhine State. We did see images and recorded several accounts of victims that were describing violations, serious violations that were very reminiscent of 2017. And what we meant by that essentially was that if you look at the way the Myanmar military has utilized its strategy, its four-cut strategy, and the tactics that entails, its reliance on heavy weaponry, airstrikes, and in particular, the way it has tried to intensify violence between communities and distrust between communities. They have been richly successful in spurring violence and intensifying violence against civilians. And so what we have been reporting on now has been the steady deterioration of the situation of grave insecurity, what that entails in terms of civilian fatalities, the burning of villages, which of course has led to mass displacement. It's rather shocking to think, even though you have not had huge headlines about this, but it's nearly 1/3 of the Rohingya that were left in Myanmar since the crisis in 2016, 2017, have now had to flee, whether they've fled into Bangladesh or have had to take boat journeys. There's incredibly dangerous boat journeys in which many never return. You've had a massive impact on the civilian population. And of course, the other feature of this, you saw it in the video, we have been getting steady reports of this and have documented some of these violations, is that the AA, as they have gained control of territory in northern Rakhine, but also throughout Rakhine State, they have steadily been aping the tactics of the Myanmar military in many cases. They have been burning villages. They have committed summary executions and killings. And of course, there have been several instances of forced recruitment, but the biggest thing that you do see is this seeming intentional forced displacement of villagers, cantoning them in larger and larger displacement scenarios. But then, just like the Myanmar military, and a critical aspect of the military strategy is to deny humanitarian access. And the AA, sadly, is also not allowing humanitarian access. And this has created a disastrous humanitarian situation for the Rohingya. And that, of course, has a blowback on other civilians in Rakhine State as well, which only furthers the distrust and interethnic tensions in the state. And what that means is the situation in Rakhine State is now, not only is it as bad as it's ever been, it may never have been worse than it is right now. And this is right at a time when we're having discussions about sustainable returns, about voluntary, dignified returns. So, another thing that we have been stating and trying to make the case for is that conditions for voluntary, dignified, sustainable returns simply do not exist right now. And that's something that we have to stress. So that's what we meant by the situation being very similar to 2017, except for in some ways, as I say, I think it's even worse.
Thank you very much. And we couldn't be more agree with you. And now maybe it's a good time to turn to Koumjian, because BRO UK has recently added the Arkan Army to the Argentina case, which issued arrest warrants to the military and other for the genocide. So could you tell us how you came to this decision?
Thank you very much, Wai Wai Nu, organizing this event, and all the members of Women Peace Network, distinguished guests, my dear friends. Thanks for joining. This is very timely event and important event for the Rohingya people. When head of OACHR Myanmar team mentioned, it's never been worse than before. Today, what we are witnessing in our Rakhine State, the Rohingya people, it's never been worse than before. So this is what we are witnessing, first point. Secondly, your question, Maui, that why we extended our economy to our Argentina case. This is a very important question. Rohingya, if you look at 2017, where our genocide happened, many decades we are suffering, but after 2017, international community well aware, we were able to listen the voices from the survivors directly. We want justice. Everyone, unitedly, Rohingya population, community, leaders from every side, they want justice. Because the brutality of the military, we have suffered. Now, this is another group, which is our economy we're looking at. And one thing, what we're looking at is 2017. We need to see that when 390 villages were burned down, thousands of Rohingya women were raped, and about 800,000 Rohingya fled. One thing that men with the military together, some Rakhine extremists, and including border guard force, many Rakhine officials joined there to expel Rohingya community. If you look at our arrest warrant of Argentina, there is one Rakhine village officer. As we Rohingya all aware, many Rakhine officials are there. So one Rakhine, his name is Joshi, he is from Chukping. He was the person who led with the military to burn down many Rohingya houses, many Rohingya leaders to kill. That's why today from Argentina court, we got arrest warrant from him. We have to see that out of 25, 23 military top generals and 22 top generals and 3 civilians in our Argentina arrest warrant. So now what I'm bringing to your attention is that time, what's happened in 2017, the people who joined, they are, perpetrators is one, but different entity now. Some perpetrators, they joined Arkan Army. Many border guard force, they shifted. Many Rakhine officials, they shifted with, they shifted to Arkan Army. They converted or whatever way you use it. So that is the issue we have to look at. As head of OACSR have mentioned, we have seen the report, rivers of blood in Tan Shau Ken, the testimony given by one villager. And I visited to Bangladesh refugee camps recently. I met many survivors. Is the horrific, terrible crimes committed by Arkan Army, which is the same pattern what Burmese military did. We never expected that. We want to live peacefully side by side with other communities. We have been living. We are still living. We must live together with them. But this is not the way what we expect from Arkan Army, unfortunately. So that's, whenever we speak, one thing is we must remember that whoever in Burma, whatever entity or whatever groups, we have to look at that. We want justice. There is no selective justice. That is very important. Because we're looking at future, inclusive future federal union moving forward. All the ethnic groups of Burma suffered many years by this military. If now we see this kind of atrocities, we must get our justice, because nobody have right to enjoy the impunity. We call in many decades to stop impunity of Burmese military. Now, if we see these kind of crimes, we must bring whoever responsible to justice, because we can feel it. Can you imagine one family out of 25, he lost like around 18 people, his grandson, granddaughter, his son, his sister, his daughters-in-law, and all men telling me the story from Huyasuri. Some of them are my relatives, my dad, paternal relatives, very near to the village where my dad grown up. That is what we got, those testimonies. So important thing is, of course, we want to go back our country, we want to live side by side, but justice and accountability is the forefront line of anything here. Thank you. I stop here.
Like you said, we, as Women's Peace Network, we have also interviewed many victims and survivors in the camp who fled to Bangladesh, as well as in Rangoon, and many people have lost their entire family. Just one person survived, especially in this massacre of Tan Shau Ken village. So yes, and it is horrifying. Speaking of refugees and the situations in Rakhine State, after the violence resumed against the military and the Arkan Army, since last year, April, at least 150,000 people have fled to Bangladesh, and then many more are taking dangerous route, sea crossing and land crossing, and people, there has been so many people, especially fleeing to the ASEAN region, not only in Bangladesh, but also ASEAN region. So Noor, I'd like to ask you about the situations of Rohingya refugees and especially ASEAN region, as well as if you want to comment on the refugee situations, like newly arrival situations in Bangladesh, since you have visited there as well. So what are your observations in your visit there?
Sure, thank you so much. I was in the Rohingya refugee camps about a month ago in Indonesia, and the situation was extremely dire. Let's just look at numbers first. UNHCR stated in the last year alone, there's been an 80% increase of Rohingya arrivals in ASEAN. And within that number, the arrivals are 75% of Rohingya women and children. So Rohingya mothers in the camps and in Myanmar are making that extremely life-threatening journey towards Indonesia, not for themselves, but for their children, looking for a better life for their children. Now, unfortunately, human traffickers are preying on Rohingya women that are making this extremely life-threatening journey. And what's happening is Rohingya women are being raped on the boat. We had a human trafficker threaten Rohingya women last year on the boat, saying that, I will tip the boat if you don't come and do what I've asked you to do. And unfortunately, 6 Rohingya women arrived in Aceh last year pregnant. And as you all know, Aceh has Sharia strict laws, so they had to carry the children. And the women gave birth from rape, and they've given birth 3 months ago. And we as an organisation had to step up and provide care to the women and provided them with gender-sensitive care, psychosocial support, and so on. Now, the camps were just completely heartbreaking. There was one site, and it was just on the beach with no roof. There were children everywhere. It was scorching hot, and the children had nothing to do. There is zero education in the camp, and our people are being forgotten in this very region. And now, this desperation is fueling one of the world's deadliest maritime journey. But what we are also seeing in the region is the increase of hate speech, misinformation, disinformation against Rohingya. And we are seeing borrowed language from Myanmar, what the military has used against us. Some of the language is saying that Rohingya are terrorists, Rohingya are too dark-skinned, Rohingya refugees are too black, Rohingya refugees don't deserve to live. This language was not new to us, and right now, what's happening is violence against Rohingya are being normalized in the region. So the manifestation of this language and there are anti-Rohingya movements also increasing in Indonesia and Malaysia. And unfortunately, shared religion is not enough anymore. It's not good enough. So we've had to come in and also step up and work on social cohesion in the region. And what we also saw was that one Rohingya mum, we managed to interview her. Her boat was pushed away last year, and she had 2 children on the boat. She was a young Rohingya mum. She was about 25 years old, and one of her child died from starvation on the boat. And you know how she had to bury her child? She threw her child in the ocean because she didn't know when she would be disembarked. And she was disembarked, and then we managed to retrieve the testimony from her. And I don't think anybody should ever go through that. So without any regional coordination, without any safe disembarkation, protection guarantees, and education access for all our children beyond Bangladesh as well, this crisis will only deepen. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you. And it is also, there has been so many Rohingya, at least 150,000, fled to Bangladesh as well, and many of them are still unable to register, and situations of refugees in the Bangladesh camps are already dire. So lucky you have recently visited the region, and and you were at the dialogue as well. And if you'd like to provide your thoughts on situations in the camp as well as your observations throughout the dialogue, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Women's Peace Network and all the member states and everyone in the room. I think for me, again, this is just a right time for us to have the conversations on refugees, and especially new arrivals in Cox's Bazar. I lived myself personally in the camps in Bangladesh for 6 years, and I was there 2 times this year. I visited in February, and I was there just 2 weeks ago where I attended the stakeholder dialogue the government of Bangladesh hosted in Cox's Bazar. As everybody has already mentioned, we did receive tens of thousands of people again were forced to flee from Myanmar to Bangladesh after the recent conflict between the Arakan army and the military. And I think just to mention this, none of these people, unfortunately, arrived in Cox's Bazar with their full family or complete family. All of them, either 2 members survived from each family, or maybe 1 person survived from each family, or maybe none of them survived from some of the families as well. So they arrived injured. They arrived with needs for medical. They arrived with needs for shelter. They arrived with needs for clothing, for example, hygiene kits, for example. And the situations, when we did meet them in person, the situation compared to my arrival in 2017 in August, a week before the festival, I think their situation was worse than when I fled myself as a kid back in 2017. So again, just to mention the current situation is in Cox's Bazar. First of all, their shelter is not covered or funded by any of the donors or organizations in refugee camps, especially for the new arrivals. They either share a tiny shelters of their existing families in the camps, or they find an empty spot to sleep, like masjid or mosques where people pray 5 times a day. And the only place they find to sleep is during the night, and during the day they have to be outside somewhere, including women and children. The funding, again, is the huge crisis and one of our top concerns when it comes to refugees in Bangladesh. We know it's going away. Everything is cutting down, especially in November and December this year. And that's one of our main concerns. When I was in Bangladesh in March, World Food Program was already preparing their announcement to cut down ration food for one individual per month to go down from $12 to $6, which is more than half, to survive on a bare minimum already. And that was my biggest concern, because we have seen 2 times of food cuts in the past. One time it went down from $12 to $8, and the other time it went down from $12 to $10. And we have seen hundreds of people, especially women and children, have taken risks on a tiny boats to travel all the way to neighboring countries, as my colleague Aziz already mentioned, to Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, because they expect a better life into those neighboring countries, and that's the only solution and only option they see when they're no longer able to survive in the camps. So speaking to funding, I think that's again one of our top priority and main concerns coming up, which we hope to highlight tomorrow at the conference. The other main concerns from the new arrivals, again, we do know, and we've seen the evidence, and it's public already, it's open secret, the crimes, intentional crimes being committed by the AA in Rakhine State against the Rohingya population. People are just not safe in Myanmar. And the reason to that, and the answer, clear answer, is we still receive people, at least 1 individual fleeing to Bangladesh in a week. At least 1 person, at least 1 family. And we still have people at the border area who are trying to find ways to cross the border and seek refuge to Bangladesh. So thanks to Bangladesh government for hosting us for decades long, and it's still they are providing shelter to the new arrivals. But I think it is time, it is not too late for us to have the attentions back from international community back to our people, our crisis in the camps. And the humanitarian crisis, both in Rakhine State and in the camps, must be addressed without any delay. That's the only medium-term solution we need from you. Well, we also focused on the long-lasting solution, which is repatriation, which never happens tomorrow or anytime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lucky. And it is. Tomorrow conference, we understand that the conference will have a lot of focus on funding as well as the repatriation, but at the same time, we cannot lose sight on the situations in Rakhine State. We can only push for repatriations only when we have a place to go back, or people to go back to, or a conducive condition to go back to. Right now, atrocities are happening. So I think that is part of the reason that we like to bring the voices from the ground, people from the community, and people who have visited to the region. And Carolyn, you have also visited to the region recently and with Amnesty team. And what else do you see? Like, in the video, the testimonies were shocking, and conditions in the camps, and if you could comment on the safety and security conditions in the camps, or any other thing that you have heard from your visit.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, Wai Wai, and thanks to all the member states and everyone here. What I heard is very much what you just heard from Lucky, very, very similar. I was in the camps in July this summer. I spoke to dozens of refugees. Many had fled in 2017, but many others arrived 6-7 months ago, fleeing violence in Myanmar that continues. It would be hard to imagine a more comprehensive failure to support and protect a community than what you will see right now in the camps. Schools are closing or have closed, food rations are being cut, gas for cook stoves is running out and won't be replaced, medical facilities are dangerously under-resourced, livelihoods programs have been completely eliminated. And every week in the camp, children are born, and every week, new arrivals enter the camp from Myanmar, where Rohingya communities are still the targets of extreme violence and are still denied citizenship, among other rights. It's not surprising to me that there is a live conversation happening right now about how untenable this situation is. And given that this is a crisis that did mobilize a fast and generous response from the UN, and 8 years on, we are in such a dark place, it's not surprising to me more generally that the utility of systems to provide refuge are under question. I understand saying that the status quo isn't working. I don't think that's a mistake. But I do think it's a mistake to believe many of the incorrect conclusions that have informed this conversation. It is devastating that we have to say out loud that this crisis isn't going to be fixed by less money, by pushing people back to homes that no longer exist, or by abandoning efforts of international justice. But we do have to say that because we have countries suggesting that we need a system of refuge that prioritizes sovereignty, exclusion, and expedience over human safety. We have countries attacking institutions designed to provide justice for violations of international law. We have leaders threatening to abandon international agreements because they believe doing so will provide for their own personal political gain. There is ample room for us to reimagine a system of refuge that supports and uplifts Rohingya communities, a system that invests in opportunity and does not repurpose the constraints that many displaced people face in their home countries. This means investing in livelihood support immediately alongside with humanitarian and food support. It means maximizing freedom of movement. It means ensuring refugees have the access to the opportunities, including professional and educational, that they need to maintain the independence that they want. We can imagine a system that works in coordination with governments, to Noor's point, so that neighboring countries are not expected to shoulder alone the funding or housing needs. Given geographic reality, Bangladesh is going to continue to host a larger community of Rohingya. But the lack of coordination of policy between governments in the region and the escalating isolation of governments beyond the region means that pathways to safety are closing when we most need to see the opposite. Other countries could and should help meet the hosting, funding, and administrative needs. Finally, we can imagine a system that resources and advances international justice and accountability. Because as long as it is possible to commit grave human rights violations to secure money and power, there will be people who do exactly that. If we are serious about creating a world in which millions of people are not driven from their home by war crimes, we need to support and fund a system that holds war criminals to account. Many of the aspects of a system like this are already envisioned by binding international agreements. Everything that I saw on my trip to Bangladesh is evidence that these agreements need to be implemented, they need to be funded, they need political will, they need to be defended and not dismantled. Thanks, Wai Wai.
Thank you, Carolyn. For the sake of, we are running a bit late, so for the sake of time, we are making a little bit of changes here. We will collect comments or questions for one round, and then maybe we'll come back to the speakers to provide final thoughts and the recommendations for lasting solutions, lasting peace in Burma and advancing justice. So let's collect the questions or comments first, and I also acknowledge the U.S. missions, the Switzerland missions, Turkey missions, and other missions who are here who I'm not aware of. And thank you very much for your presence. And please take the floor. And if you have questions or comments, please be mindful that it is under 1 minute. Thank you very much. Yes, ladies.
To the panelists and esteemed delegates, my name is Adlercreutz, and I'm a representative of the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. I was particularly struck by the reminder that nearly 1/3 of Myanmar's population is youth. And for my generation, digital technologies are not simply tools we use, but they are the language we think, organize, and build futures in. And so that makes one thing clear. In order to tackle this crisis and also achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for Myanmar youth and Rohingya youth, it's not going to be possible without the leadership of young people who actually understand and inhabit this space. And among crisis-affected contexts, especially among Rohingya youth, we've seen young people building fact-checking collectives to counter hate speech, creating apps to map human rights violations, and designing safe digital spaces where their communities can access education and preserve identity. So these are not peripheral contributions, but they are essential innovations that often emerge faster and closer to community needs than traditional approaches. So with this momentum, I have a question for the panelists in terms of how can we shift the power so that youth, particularly those from displaced and conflict-affected communities, are not merely consulted, but have formal seats at the table designing, governing, and monitoring the very digital systems that shape our futures. And beyond the rhetoric, what concrete mechanisms from funding streams to accountability frameworks are needed to ensure that youth-led innovation and campaigns, both on social media and on the ground, directly inform how we deploy services for the Rohingya youth and in achieving our SDGs, particularly around peace, justice, and strong institutions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great questions. We have actually two youth as a panel. Both Lucky and Noor are under 25, technically youth. Technically youth. So we are on board. But great question. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And do we have any questions or comment? Please keep it under 1 minute. Yes, please.
Yes, I would like to know what is the sustainable solution moving forward. Has there been talks, discussion about sending peacekeeping? If we decided to, I know one of the ambassadors mentioned about dignified return, sustainable return. Would a discussion about having peacekeeping force? Because I know this is a very sensitive topic.
Thank you.
So I just want to put it out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, comment? Yes, Mayuri.
About the barriers to work permits in the Bangladesh camps, given the protracted displacement. Do you see sort of hope for access to the right to work being expanded in Bangladesh?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Thomas, we have Thomas Ohik Kantena, who used to be a special reporter on the human rights situations of Myanmar, the UN Special Rapporteur on human rights situations in Myanmar, and currently he is leading Argentina Universal Jurisdiction case. Thomas, you want to say a few words?
An honor to be here, and as a former special rapporteur for Myanmar, it's really like a deja vu to be here and to discuss again the abuses committed by the military in Burma, Myanmar. The call for justice of the Rohingya and the call of other ethnic minorities is a call to be recognized, as a community, to be respected in their identity, and accountability has been key in the history of Burma, Myanmar through decades. The military has been impugned, and under that impunity, they continue to commit crimes. That therefore, the plight for justice and accountability is very important.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Thomas. And so now I would like to give the panelists the last word, maybe less than 2 minutes or like a minute and a half, because we are running out of time. So if you could comment on any of the questions that was, or comments that was provided earlier, and also around what should be done now to protect the Rohingya in Rakhine State and to advance justice and find lasting peace in Myanmar and all across Myanmar. Thank you. Maybe Kotongken first, if you want to comment.
Or
So you can combine. You can pick up any question that
I will
was
pick
raised.
up the question.
Or you can just comment on the lasting peace and protecting Rohingya and advancing justice.
I think we need to look at, as I mentioned earlier, we look at 2017 now to the 2025, 8 years now. 1 million, now 1.2 million in Bangladesh refugee camp, the world largest refugee camp. And we've been advocating for return instead situation getting much worse. And we have seen that Security Council sat down for 6 to 7 times. We haven't seen as resolution. Instead, we see one presidential resolution or something, a presidential statement we have seen. So that peacekeeping force issue, the world is now very attention to Palestine, Gaza, and other sides of the world, and Ukraine. I don't think that paying attention that much, but we have to keep momentum to put pressure. First thing is not to cut humanitarian aid to the Bangladesh refugee camp. That is one of the top priority. Of course, as a whole Burma, other minorities are facing the cutting from US and others, especially leading by US. This is really wasn't a situation. If you look at US, the government declared that genocide in 2022. US being top line supporting humanitarian aid support. We always appreciate. We thanks to US government and others, EU and others. But now, as OACHR head of team mentioned, never been worse than before what we are facing now. In this time, we are facing 8 cuts in the camps. In Sitwe IDP camps, 145,000. In Pokto, 125,000 Rohingyas. And one way, Burmese military blocking of 8. Another way, 8 are not allowed. They don't have 8. For example, World Food Program have mentioned like from next month, they might not be able to provide aid to the Sitwe IDP camps. So what will be their future? How will this community will survive? We're talking about 145,000 Rohingyas. So that is one thing. Secondly, whenever we talk, this is important that justice and accountability should be on the forefront line. Rohingya have been leading many cases in Argentina, ICC, ICJ. These cases, international community continue support. For example, in Argentina case, we have arrest warrant, but we are waiting from international community support that to get red alert notice from Interpol. But Interpol is still, getting delay. But when we look at as a whole Burma, this is one only case we have arrest warrant for military, top generals in many decades, never been before. It's not only for the Rohingya, it's for all the people of Burma. That other minorities, our other brothers and sisters in Burma, they are facing war crimes and crimes against humanity for many decades. So we are together with them. We are fighting common enemy. So please help us to get this arrest warrant implement from through Interpol. That is very important. And lastly, whenever we talk about Rohingya, that safety and security, dignified return, that is always forefront line. But we need protection. 500,000 Rohingyas in Rakhine State right now, and what they are economy expelling day by day. We have many credible evidence how our economy involve human trafficking and also getting Rohingya out of the country. So I don't want to go long as I have very short time. So please, we must put maximum pressure our economy to stop these crimes immediately and bring them justice, also to return our original place. Also, we want to live peacefully side by side, peaceful coexistence, that is important. International community must put pressure.
Thank you
Of course, on top of line, protection is one of the main issues. Thank you. I stop here.
Thank you very much. And Lucky?
Thank you. Sorry, to pick up, I forgot the name, but I didn't catch. To pick up the question on the work permit in the camps, also going back to the Amnesty International briefing on that, I think people in the camps, definitely, we know there's a need for medium-term and a long-term solution. So when we talk about the medium-term solution, that definitely the work permit and the livelihood opportunities for people in the camps, especially for families with zero earnings in the camps. Majority of them have no incomes at all. They're just dependent, as I described before, on the food rations. And the last one would be for us, I'm sure it is mainly focused on the humanitarian and human rights issues, but I think I also want to take your attention back to the political representation gap that we still have largely. Rohingyas are largely excluded from any kind of decision-making processes. That includes Bangladesh, any other regional countries, and especially Myanmar. So I think there is a need for more Rohingya meaningful and safe participation in all decision-making processes, including humanitarian level or political level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for keeping time. And Noor?
On the question about digital technology. Now, if we look at the hate speech in Myanmar, unfortunately, the genocide of the Rohingya has been so successful because they received a large amount of public support from the people of Myanmar and other ethnic groups. And unfortunately, this was the case. So what we've done as a organization is we've organized events in Southeast Asia. So we started the reconciliation process where we went to Chiang Mai and we organized an event. We cooked Rohingya food, we wore our cultural clothing, and we invited the people of Myanmar to come and see us and come and meet Rohingya women and come and speak to us. And it ended in tears. There were people saying, I didn't know that this was happening to your people. There are still progressive movements in Myanmar and beyond Myanmar that still deny the genocide of the Rohingya till today. So we are going back to the region and the reconciliation process to build empathy and the recognition of our people starts now, not when we can go back home. Finally, I wanted to end it by saying that the Rohingya, we are not statistics, we are people. Behind every number is a child sleeping without any shelter, a mother afraid of being raped, whether in Bangladesh or on the boat, a family risking death at sea because they see no other choice. Persecution has taken away our homes, myself, Lucky, Wai Wai, and we are here and we are leading. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. And Carolyn, yes, if you want to comment on what should be done domestically in Burma.
Yeah, I'll be quick. First of all, fund the gaps right now in the camps. Don't let this collapse of services continue. Beyond that, fund multilaterals. Make sure that there is money going to sustain for the immediate term, the short term, the long term. Like, it needs a response, and it needs a response right now. Beyond that, I would also say, repeat the stories you're hearing about what it is like in Rakhine and the people entering the camps right now. Don't let a narrative solidify that it is possible to send people to something that no longer exists. And if we are serious about making changes that will allow people to return in safety, then we need to talk about coordinated regional policies. We need to talk about real solutions to what's really happening. But we can't, the starting point for that cannot be a myth that this situation isn't as dire as it is both in the camps right now and in Rakhine, and there's nothing we can do except face that directly.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And James, the questions around protection, discussions around what can be done to protect the current Rohingya remaining in Rakhine state. When repatriation, if that's happened, we don't know, but if that's happened, what kind of security conditions or protections mechanism could be put in place? And you heard the questions, our community in Bangladesh and in Rakhine state calling for a safe zone and international peacekeepers, but these are extremely unrealistic. But then what is possible here, if you could provide any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know what I could say about practicalities and and realism at this point. I mean, the situation in the country has never failed to surprise you at how it can get worse. Yeah. And I know that this is an event that and we're about to go into an event tomorrow, which is supposed to be more diplomatic in its language. But I would just like to say, to sort of stretch the bounds of diplomacy at the moment, that all the ways in which protection has deteriorated, it has been because of a strategy. It has been a strategic choice of the Myanmar military to target civilians. And Min Aung Hlaing in recent meetings is actually saying that if Israel can do it, or if other states can target civilians, why can't I? And it's incredibly interesting to me that right at this time when the focus should be on protection, de-escalation, and humanitarian access, as the military agreed under the 5-point consensus, instead, we are talking about elections. We're talking about, ever since the earthquake, the growing legitimacy or legitimization of the military by member states inviting Min Aung Hlaing outside the country, allowing him to rub shoulders with heads of states, his growing confidence. And at the same time, the forces in the world that have supported democracy, have supported the resiliency of the Myanmar people to resist the military's oppressive tactics, its deliberate targeting of civilians, they're sending a loud signal by cutting funding, particularly for civil society, for documentation, and for justice. And that is a very powerful message that is coming at this time. So I would say what would be more practical is actually back up your political goals, back up your political strategies to do nothing to legitimize this coup. This elections process is going to go forward. There are some states that are going to use any attempt at an election, whether it's a sham election or anything else, they're going to use that as an attempt to legitimize what the military is doing. And whenever you legitimize that elections process, you are legitimizing not only the coup, you are legitimizing their strategy of punishing the civilians for their opposition. And that includes how they have deliberately stirred up ethnic tensions in Rakhine, how they have contributed to the mass displacement, further mass displacement of the Rohingya people. And essentially what you're going to have are ballots that are marked in blood if this continues. So I think at this point, in order to know what to say about what is practical, we need to see greater commitment. We need to see greater leadership. And we need to see greater courage in backing up the claims that this coup cannot be legitimized. And of course, that goes hand in hand with accountability, breaking the cycle of impunity, not allowing impunity to win the day when it comes to the violence that has been perpetrated these last 4.5 years. But thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And certainly, we are here today, and based on all of your comments, we are failing. The international community has failed and continue to fail because of lack of cohesive and coordinated response. And as well as the lack of interest and ignorance of the situations, the seriousness of the situations. And thank you so much for your comments, and we definitely want to see more commitment, like you said, tomorrow from the member states, and we really hope that this will not be one-day event, and this will be the beginning of the new cohesive and coordinated actions and response for the Rohingya community to provide protections, safety, and advance justice and bring about lasting peace in Myanmar. With that being said, I thank you, all of the distinguished panelists today. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite Ambassador Her Excellencies Sandra Johnson-Landy, Deputy Permanent Representative, Permanent Missions of the Denmark to the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and let me start by thanking everyone, all the panelists especially, for their powerful testimonies and really interesting insights. I think a key takeaway for me here is that you have reminded us that it's not a humanitarian crisis only we're talking about. It is a question of protection, it's a question of justice, it's a question of dignity and of humanity. I think it's very clear that the situation is deteriorating in Myanmar, in Rakhine, in Cox's Bazar, and I echo the call that just when you think it can't get worse, it seems to get worse and worse. It's been 8 years after the mass displacement from Rakhine State, and the Rohingya population in and outside Myanmar continues to face violent persecution and serious human rights violations, as we've heard today. We heard about the women being targeted by sexual and gender-based violence, either where they are in their new camps or on the dangerous journeys that they are forced to take. And of course, this is not something we should just accept. It's something we have to address. It's just very difficult to do so, and I think there were questions around what can we do in terms of peacekeeping operations and so on, and Denmark has the honor right now to serve on the Security Council as an elected member, and I can say that it's of course there's a competition with a lot of crises in this world, and that's one of the reasons that there's not so much focus on Myanmar, but it's not only, it's also politically just very, very difficult in this geopolitical situation to address the situation and to do something, and it's also just difficult to see what would actually be effective with the military junta in place. But that doesn't mean that it's off our radar. We do get a lot of really, really horrific reports, and it's important to keep on making us aware of what's going on, and that's why an event like today is so incredibly important. We recognize also, of course, the need for humanitarian support, humanitarian aid in the meantime until we work on the greater problems of the root causes of all of this. And we need to continue to recognize that the host country, I think, in Bangladesh in particular, carries a really heavy responsibility, and they need our support. So we are trying to sustain our aid level from Danish side on 0.7%. We feel a little bit alone in the world on that by now, but we of course will always urge more donors to step forward. There are a lot of needs, unfortunately, to cover at the moment. But I think I want to end on just a more hopeful note. I do think it's a devastating situation. There's a lot to do, and it's hard to see how can we do it. But I think it's so important that you're here, you're speaking up, and that we have the conference tomorrow. So just to say we are ready to stand by and help with whatever solutions we can be helpful with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Lastly, not the least, His Excellency Ambassador Bob Ray, Permanent Representative, Permanent Missions of the Canada to the United Nations, to provide a closing remark for this.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. As some of you will know, I was asked by my former Prime Minister to become the special envoy on the Rohingya issue after the expulsions of 2017, and so I paid my first visit to the region in that fall. So that's 8 years ago, and. I have to say, listening to you today, it would be easy to kind of throw up your hands and say, well, things are now worse than they were then. And we've suggested a whole bunch of things and a number of things that actually have happened. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just ask you to join me in thinking through some of the lessons that we've learned and some of the things that some of the strengths that we have that we didn't necessarily have then. The first strength are the people in this room. Because a generation has grown up of, I'm delighted to say, women, and a few men, but a lot of women, who who have learned the hard way from the really tough lessons of deep experience of discrimination, of violence, and of marginalization, and who are still lighting a light to all of us, telling us what's going on, telling us what can be done, how we can do it, where we have to do it. The situation is the hill is bigger to climb than it was for a couple of reasons. One, because the global displacement situation is worse than it was, decidedly worse. And what this creates is a competition, tragically, for attention and for funding from a wider number of groups. And so in 2017, the Rohingya issue came onto the stage in a way that captured attention for a period of time, and we were able to get to a constructive agenda that flowed more funds into the camps, that worked hard with Bangladesh to get them to work with the World Bank and other institutions to try to improve the overall situation. And then to take steps on the accountability front that people wouldn't have imagined. Nick wasn't doing his job 8 years ago. There wasn't a job to be done. We didn't have the range of countries that had agreed to go to the ICJ, and we did that. We did a bunch of things that you can say, well, it hasn't happened yet. We still don't have anybody in jail. But anybody who knows anything about international law will tell you it takes a long time, and it's very difficult to get to that level of accountability. So I'm not a Pollyanna kind of person, and this will be my last 2 years in this job. I seem to only able to last in the job for 5 years, and then and then it's over. So, but let me just say this about the Rohingya issue. I am there for the long haul. Any way in which I can be personally helpful, I will do anything I can to try to advance the cause in wherever I happen to be. I think we have to take this week as a chance to really take stock of where we are and who we are. Who is we? Because we are not, we don't come together very often, except maybe online every once in a while. But we have to figure out what are our collective strengths and how can we put them to work on behalf of the people who are living in such terrible, difficult situations. Well, I am a diplomat, but I don't normally talk diplomatically. And now that I've been freed from further responsibilities, I can say pretty much anything I want, so I'm going to do that. The first thing we have to do, and I'm just repeating some points that have been made, we have to stop this narrative, which I tried to stop 8 years ago, to say we've got to get people back into Myanmar. It's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen. Yes, one day we'll have safe, dignified. You're going to hear it tomorrow. Everybody's going to repeat the phrase, safe, dignified. And you say, what is this stuff that people are spouting? The fact of the matter is there's nothing to go back to at the moment. It's not safe, and it won't be dignified. There's a civil war going on in Rakhine, so that can't happen. So as far as Bangladesh is concerned, we have to make a case for Bangladesh to the rest of the world to say this country has taken on this crisis, and it is critical that we remember their needs, not only their humanitarian needs, but their development needs, and that there be a coherent strategy for Bangladesh to allow them to maintain a situation where people can stay with some sense of dignity and protection, and two other things, work and education, that allows people to live in some kinds of conditions. And we have to do that systematically, not only with Bangladesh, but with every country where the Rohingya have settled. And say there's a job to be done in each place. And we have to take those places one by one and say what needs to be done and how can we do it. There will be resistance. And we have to do a job in Western capitals to say, come on, what's happened? Why do you think that somehow less is more? Less is never more. Less is less. And even less is even less. So we have to get the funding back, and we have to put this right on the front pages of everywhere to see that people understand this is one crisis that can't go off the charts. We can't forget about this, because it will cost even more lives than it has cost so far. People will starve. I mean, you would say, well, there's a famine in Gaza. There's a famine in Sudan. Well, there's going to be another famine in Bangladesh and in the camps where people are not able to get food. It will happen unless we stop it. And it's not, quote, Bangladesh's fault. No one can criticize Bangladesh for saying to the world, we can't do this on our own, and you've got to be there with us and for us. And they're absolutely right. But we also have to say that the narratives have to change a little bit. And finally, I think we're going to have to look at another thing which has been rarely put on the table, which needs to be put on the table. And that is, we do have to look at the issue of resettlement in a more systematically and ordered way than we've ever been able to have that conversation before. Because for the longest time, everybody said, oh, the Rohingya will go back eventually. They'll either settle in Bangladesh or they'll go back to Myanmar. And therefore, it's not a big resettlement issue. I don't agree with that. I didn't agree with it then. I don't agree with it now. I think resettlement has to be part of every effort that we make to say there has to be some greater effort. And I think this is the agenda that we need to develop a consensus around among those who are advocating and those who are working in the area. And then we have to take it to governments, many of whom will initially be alarmed and indifferent because they see their domestic political environment as making the movement of people even more difficult than it was before. And we have to fight back. We have to fight back against this wall of, first of all, indifference, and then worse, hatred, exclusion, and a failure to recognize the dignity of the Rohingya people. I can remember when I first went to Myanmar, I was in a cab, a taxi, and I was talking to the driver about the Rohingya, and he stopped the cab, and he said, the Rohingya, why do you care about the Rohingya? I said, well, because I just visited the camp and they're in terrible shape. He said, get out of my cab. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, and I got out, I said, fine, okay. And then I got another cab, and I thought about it for a moment, and I said, when the level of prejudice and hatred gets that deep, it's difficult to move on. It's difficult to make the progress that we need to make. But we have to keep on fighting and keep on doing everything we can. I think the way in which we're able now to document more carefully each and every path and why that path needs to be improved, it can't work. I just think we've got to look at it that way. And the most important thing is we must not give up hope, because hope is the one thing that allows us to create the space that allows us to keep on fighting. And if we stop fighting, we're in deep trouble. That's when really bad things start to happen. We simply cannot afford to give up. And I think it's important for us to remember that as we go forward. With a coherent strategy, we can keep it in line, make it relatively simple, document it with the way in which we're documenting it. But we have an obligation to each other to do this, because all of us who've been affected by this crisis have been touched by it. And we should never let that emotion go. Should never ourselves turn for a moment to think this will solve itself on its own. It won't solve itself on its own. It will only solve itself if we keep pushing with that common approach in line.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your wisdom and providing some of the very important recommendations, laying out some of these in details. We really appreciate you, and thank you so much for your commitment and leadership on this issue. And finally, I'd like to thank the sponsoring member states, Malta, Canada, Finland, Denmark, and our NGO partner, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Asia Justice Coalitions, Global Justice Center, IGMAP, UUSC, and PEMA for all your support and coordinations for these processes, and we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. I end the event today here. Thank you very much for all joining.